Healing, Divine Art, by Manly Palmer Hall. This book on metaphysical medicine is lovingly dedicated to my mother, who has dedicated her life to the healing arts. The gold and ivory statue of Asclepius in the temple at Hierakon, the sanctuary of Epidaurus, a temple erected to a physician-priest elevated to the rank of demigod. Reproduced from the print supplied by the United States National Museum. Preface. The purpose of this book is to make available in a single volume a wide variety of evidence related to the theory and practice of metaphysical medicine, and to point out certain general and unchanging principles relevant to the physician and their practice. Results cannot advance as proof of the method until the philosophy of the method itself is firmly established. For the healer to advance in their work, they must study their cases and maintain permanent records of the means they have employed and the types of patients who have responded to the various methods of treatment. As far as I have been able to ascertain, there is no general text on metaphysical medicine readily available in this language. By general text, I mean a work that is not influenced by the author's adherence to the teachings of any particular group or sect. The value of a reference work is considerably diminished when it is evident that it has been written with enthusiastic support for a specific belief or body of beliefs. Such books may define the methods of particular cults, but they cannot be considered general reference texts. An analysis of the material in several of the best-known of these writings would indicate that the compilers were working from theoretical convictions rather than from observation or personal experience. It is not difficult to detect empirical viewpoints, because they are always in conflict with the results of clinical studies. The theorists lack the mental flexibility of those who must adapt their opinions to the diversity of current practice. There is no doubt that a considerable part of so-called spiritual healing is, in reality, nothing more than suggestive therapy, but this is obviously unknown to many who practice the healing arts. Indeed, much of religious healing is suggestion or autosuggestion, and the results obtained are due to the sincere conviction that such results can be achieved. This is not an official or technical treatise, but a faithful account of what has been learned through experience. When dealing with various afflictions, it is necessary to adapt the formulas to the problems posed by individual experiences, traditions, and dispositions. Adapting psychological techniques is a mistake that causes many errors in the field of psychotherapy. I place special emphasis on ailments stemming from religious causes because these cases predominate in my personal experience. There is no worse confusion than being confused by religious beliefs. And to date, very little practical information is available on religious ailments and their treatment. This book is divided into two sections. The first historical, and the second technical and clinical. The historical section, however, presents more everyday problems than might first appear. Most of the material it contains relates directly to current beliefs. The most primitive convictions concerning health and disease in general still circulate today under a thin layer of modern terminology. During his long vigils in the cave on Mount Hira, Muhammad prayed that through him the simple and eternal truth of the ancient religion might be revealed to the world. With the same spirit, I have tried to share in this book some of the simple and eternal truth about health, as it has been taught by the sages of all ages. Manly Palmer Hall. Introduction. In ancient times, disease was largely attributed to ignorance of the physical laws governing health. In the modern world, disease is often the result of ignorance of the laws governing the spiritual, mental, and emotional forces at work in people's lives. In our effort to conquer the external world, we have failed to respond to the challenge of inner existence. In ancient times, the tribes that inhabited the earth were mostly nomadic. They migrated, sometimes over great distances, in search of better hunting grounds or more fertile lands, abandoning their old homes due to a scarcity of prey or impoverished soils. In their wanderings, these people escaped many of the diseases that afflict modern humanity. When these nomads began to establish permanent communities, their health problems immediately increased. The vagrant had left his refuse behind and moved to a healthier environment, but the city builder piled his refuse on the outskirts of old towns and villages, and this is where many of the diseases that continue to plague our species originated. It is only in the last 100 years that the sanitation problems of large cities have been resolved. In the 16th century, Florentines drove herds of pigs through the streets of Florence to clear the garbage thrown from the windows of both palaces and humble dwellings. Later, they would slaughter and eat the pigs. In Venice, conditions were so poor that most of the doges contracted smallpox, even those living in the luxurious surroundings of the doge's palace. London also had very little sanitation until the end of the 18th century. Inadequate nutrition also played a significant role in the health problems of our ancestors. They relied largely on seasonal hunting for food, and there was no proper way to preserve meat. Explorers have described how the natives of certain less advanced African tribes, especially the pygmies, would devour raw the rotting remains of an animal that had been dead for days in the rainforest. A diet of partially decomposed fish is now considered responsible for some of Asia's most feared diseases, including the leprosy so prevalent in China. If only nature hadn't fulfilled its promise of a healthy diet, these problems would have been even more pronounced. Given this challenge of poor nutrition and the immune system, it is doubtful that the human species could have survived. Ventilation was another mystery to our noble ancestors. Their caves and dens were never touched by the purifying rays of the sun, and ventilation was entirely beyond their understanding. When humans began to build houses, their primary concern was protection, and every unnecessary opening was just another hazard. It wasn't until this century that laws were enacted mandating proper ventilation in private homes, factories, and public buildings. And there were many protests against this extravagant procedure. Infant mortality has always been high among primitive peoples. This has not been solely due to natural disasters. The birthing process itself has often involved religious ceremonies and rituals not always conducive to the survival of the mother or child. The queens of Egypt were required by the state to deliver their children in a public ceremony while seated on the birth throne. Blows were widely used among primitive tribes to hasten childbirth. Medieval physicians considered it completely beneath them to attend a birth unless the parents were royalty. They were confident in calling upon a castrated person to perform a caesarean section. More recently, midwives used blunderbusses, firing them near the ear of the pregnant woman to hasten labor. Surgery and bone repair were among the highlights of ancient medical practice. Injuries sustained in war and hunting were devastating in those days. The causes of such injuries were obvious, and there was less mystery involved in examining the facts. The Edwin Smith Papyrus indicates that the Egyptians possessed considerable surgical knowledge at least 2,000 years before the Christian era. Examinations of ancient, possibly prehistoric, skulls show that even trepanation was successfully performed in ancient times. Furthermore, excellent examples of early dentistry are known, in which teeth were adorned with precious or semi-precious stones. In the last 2,000 years, humanity's material knowledge has increased so considerably that most of the natural dangers that afflicted ancient humans have been overcome. We no longer fear the ghosts and spirits that plagued the lives of the uncivilized savages of the old world. We have every right to be proud of our achievements, but despite boasting of this progress, humankind still falls ill, suffers, and dies. And it is sad to say, but much of our misery is the result of superstitions and traditions as senseless and deadly as those that afflicted primitive races. The city is an interesting example of the survival of an ancient tradition that is no longer significant. That great ancient book of symbols, the Bible, says that Cain, the fratricide, was the first city builder. There was nothing cultural or aesthetic about the impulse to create large communities. The motive was fear and the desire for mutual protection. Most ancient towns had walls, and people crowded inside these walls for safety from invading armies and plunderers. The invention of artillery ended the era of walled cities, but custom ensured the continuation of crowding, even after these towns were nothing more than death traps for their inhabitants. The first walled cities were little more than villages. Large cities were unknown in the ancient world. Large communities present problems that even the classical Greeks, wise in so many arts and sciences, were never able to solve. It fell to the Romans to develop the complex system of aqueducts and sewers that made the modern metropolis possible. Although today's great cities stand as monuments to human ingenuity, they remain a serious threat to human health. Large communities bring unhealthy congestion, exacerbate poverty, and are breeding grounds for crime. Vocations and pastimes, entertainment, and the entertainment of city dwellers is artificial. Humanity, trapped in a man-made world, has lost touch with the universe created by God. No mere Adamite has ever humbled himself before the grotesque fate of his demon's worship with such blind devotion as modern man venerates the superstition of wealth. The theory of accumulation has ruined the entire course of our civilization. It has set everyone against their brother and filled the world with a terrible fear. No longer is it the old blind fear of the unknown, but a new and tangible terror, the sick realization that survival itself is at stake, threatened by human selfishness. Savage men feared the mysterious forces of nature, but civilized men fear one another, having learned that humankind itself is the most dangerous of all creatures. Unfortunately, the concept of wealth is responsible for most of man's inhumanity toward man. The free villages in the Andes Mountains are completely socialized communities. They are entirely outside our economic theories and operate according to ancient Inca laws. These free villages produce exclusively for their own use, and the profit system is unknown to them. Citizens cooperate in all tasks. There is no poverty and virtually no crime. These small mountain villages were untouched by the Great Depression of 1929, for the simple reason that they had no debt. It is common for economists to dismiss these socialized communities as insignificant, and to insist that their norms could not be applied in large cities or nations. These arguments may have some merit, but the evidence concludes that cooperative living is the only solution to the fear of the economic complex that is destroying the health and peace of mind of so-called civilized races. In a way of life based on the doctrine of debt, nervous disorders are bound to increase. Insecurity is the norm, and everyone must struggle through their days to maintain some semblance of physical success. There is very little time for healthy rest in any family where a serious illness can destroy the economic stability of 3 generations. It is no wonder that rare and unknown diseases flourish in such an environment. It must be said that the divine power that governs universal nature is in no way influenced by humankind's financial aspirations. The entire mechanism of accumulation is a human invention and has no significance outside the human sphere. If people wish to create small symbols of metal or paper, worship them, and fight, deceive, and kill for them, it is a matter of no interest from the broader perspective of outer space. An omniscient providence has made available to the human race everything necessary to ensure peace, happiness, health, and security. If mortals prefer to argue over debits and credits in a universe teeming with life and beauty, their rewards will be in accordance with the demerits of their deeds. Modern man's major phobias are closely linked to the false beliefs to which he is addicted. Among the most common phobias are the fear of poverty, the fear of old age, the fear of war, the fear of financial failure, the fear of illness, and the fear of death. All of these fears are related to financial status. We fear poverty because it threatens the survival of everything important to our external lives. We fear old age because it results in unemployment and subsequent dependency. We may fear war for various reasons, but one of them is the resulting economic crisis. We fear financial failure as one of the greatest possible disasters for an individual. We fear illness because it jeopardizes our economic productivity. And we fear death because it can leave our loved ones without adequate provision. Many of our fears are interpreted in terms of money, and life itself is measured in years of purchasing power. It's not hard to understand that conscious or unconscious tension caused by constant fear is detrimental to health and life. The result is the great American disease, nerves. A great scholar from the East Indies, whom I met in Calcutta, made several pertinent observations on the subject of nervous tension. He said, "In essence, it is impossible for man's mental life to develop naturally and normally toward a state of enlightenment unless the physical environment is simplified in every possible way. Creative thought must come from an environment that does not interfere with the sensitive impulses emanating from the mind through the ethers and into the brain. The confusion, stress, tension, interruptions, noise, and constant vibratory agitation present in the environment of the average Westerner make it virtually impossible to think of a way to solve personal problems." When I suggested to this wise Asian man that he visit the United States, the kind gentleman was horrified at the idea. He exclaimed, "But I couldn't possibly think of the United States, and if I can't think, I'm dead. To think is to live, and to exist without thinking is to be less than an animal. I'll stay where I am, where I can sit peacefully under my favorite tree and live in harmony with nature." Nerves can manifest alterations in their structure and function in a wide variety of ways. The most obvious disorders can be diagnosed with reasonable accuracy, and the most perplexing symptoms are summarized under the general term nervous breakdown. Unfortunately, nervous exhaustion and overstimulation are very likely to lead to a number of strange and extremely complex mental and emotional abnormalities. Once the nerves have been battered by the stress of their environment, the entire personality loses the ability to relax into a normal rhythm of life, and the result is revealed through peculiarities of disposition. In Western societies, there is a popular belief that a bad temper is normal and sometimes even appropriate. Excitability, irritability, and violent outbursts are all encompassed by the term temperament. It is rare for a person with a bad temper to find anything they can do to correct their own faults. People who have come to me for help are horrified at the idea of trying to practice self-control. When they are told that the cause of the problem is a bad temper, they invariably reply, "I know I shouldn't have such outbursts, but I can't help it." A bad temper causes strong reactions in the body, disrupting its functions and even attacking its very structure. It is impossible for anyone to escape the consequences of their own attitudes, as these attitudes affect bodily harmony. In early life, humans are sustained by a powerful reservoir of physical energy. This is evident in children, who are never still and overflow with a seemingly inexhaustible supply of vitality. The mental and emotional habits acquired in youth often do not show their consequences until after adolescence. Gradually, as the supply of vital force diminishes, the body begins to show the effects of the various mental and emotional abuses it has suffered. Extreme character traits give rise to chronic physical illnesses. Character peculiarities, as we nurture them over the years, become fixed within us as bodily ailments, affecting our future years with countless misfortunes that destroy our happiness and peace of mind. Nowhere in nature is the law of cause and effect more evident than in physical health problems. Take cancer, for example. I have been able to gather a large number of case histories that indicate cancer is a disease of sadness. It is more likely to arise in the individual who has locked away their disappointments, sorrows, and hurts. Grief consumes the normal optimism of human nature, producing in the consciousness a condition identical to that which cancer needs to take hold in the body. Because women are more prone to silently harbor the affliction in their hearts, this disease is particularly prevalent among them. In 3 cases I know of, deep remorse and self-censorship within a year resulted in breast cancer, and in each case, there was no cancer in their family history. In my experience, diabetes is often associated with a hypocritical reaction to life circumstances. Individuals who demand a level of perfection from others that they themselves lack, and then build a negative and cynical disposition from their disappointments, become easy prey for diabetes and chronic kidney problems. Rheumatism and arthritis occur in people unable to adapt to change. I know of several cases where severe cases of these diseases have improved rapidly by freeing the mind from the stress of trying to preserve the status quo in an ever-changing world. An elderly woman I once met was determined to maintain her Victorian traditions well into the 20th century. As late as 1920, this colorful character refused to ride in cars, used neither electric light nor a telephone, and dressed in the fashion of the 1870s. She would not be part of that progressive movement which she was convinced was leading the world straight to ruin. The orthodoxy of her views was irrefutable, and she shuffled around town suffering from rheumatic problems in every joint. Finally, through a series of curious circumstances, this elderly woman had rejuvenated. Nearing 80, she surrendered her struggle to maintain her old way of life and blossomed with a progressive spirit that astonished the entire community. 6 months later, her rheumatism was gone, and she enjoyed excellent health until she was 94. Chronic stomach problems are more common among anxious people and those whose fragile egos are easily wounded. A nervous stomach is a difficult ailment to bear gracefully, but if the mind can be trained to be less critical of others and more tolerant of their own views, digestion will immediately show a marked improvement. Although not all illnesses can be attributed to character traits, it can be accurately stated that all people with negative character traits are ill. A negative character trait is one of the heaviest burdens the flesh can bear. Nervous people often accumulate destructive tension around the simplest processes of life. This tension distorts and deforms useful and noble beliefs and convictions. Religion, for example, must be approached with an optimistic attitude, or the believer will soon find themselves in serious trouble. Most of the fanaticism, intolerance, and narrow-mindedness so evident among those addicted to religious convictions are the result of nervous tension manifesting itself in the sphere of spiritual beliefs. Religion is extremely dangerous for the neurotic because it will channel their neurosis into a disastrous situation. Yet, it is the neurotic who is most likely to seek solace in religion. It is an ancient philosophical truth that human beings must normalize any subject they wish to consider, or they will fail in that subject. In our Western theory of education, we have overlooked the role that the individual plays in the arts or sciences they are studying. For example, medicine is more than a science, it is a way of life, and only one who lives in accordance with the philosophy of medicine can become a great doctor. Music is not simply a technique. A musicologist who is versed in the whole of music theory must live the life of music to derive the full benefit from musical education. We cannot bring an old way of life into a new art without destroying that art through the limitations of our consciousness. Of all the arts and sciences, life itself is the greatest and most profound. It takes many years to train a doctor or a lawyer in the details of their profession, but it takes many lifetimes of experience and reflection for a human being to reach the fullness of their own humanity. To be a successful human being, a person must study the laws that govern their development and then apply those laws to every aspect of their life. Only when a person lives intelligently, simply, efficiently, and with gentleness of spirit can they be mentally wise, emotionally happy, and physically healthy. To the extent that they compromise the truth, to that extent they will be ill. Philosophy, therefore, is preventative medicine. Philosophy, then, teaches about health, how it can be preserved, and if it is lost, how it can be recovered. The beginning of health is the discovery of the gods. Our personal life is based on our conviction about the nature of the eternal being. When we can perceive, behind visible nature, a universal principle of goodness in all things through wisdom, strength, and beauty, we free our minds from various doubts regarding providence. These innerly discovered certainties grant the courage necessary for right action, establishing the mind in peace and harmony. The second necessary element in a normal philosophy of life is the understanding of the eternity of being, and the understanding of the great law of evolution through which all life is growing toward perfection. There must be a sense of participation in the growth and development of all that is visible in nature. The purpose of life is growth, and a person is successful to the extent that they develop their character in harmony with the laws of the world of which they are a part. The third consideration is sharing who we are and what we have with others of our species. Cooperation, friendship, and the constructive emotions that human beings bring to each other in harmony are important elements in a healthy philosophy. The final consideration is leisure. Haste and stress must be eliminated from the art of living. The civilized human being is one who has discovered the dignity of leisure, and it is this discovery that made the Greeks, the Hindus, and the Chinese great in philosophy, art, and literature. Time must be set aside, rescued from less important pursuits, to cultivate oneself. This means freeing oneself from the tension that comes with non-resistance to ideas, and allowing for those periods of contemplation that are part of true maturity. If we want to be well in body and mind, we must free ourselves from the illusion of a materialistic civilization and renounce the unlivable habits of haste, ambition, greed, and competition. Each person must bear their own suffering, and we will be affected by the sins of our world to the extent that we cooperate with the world's pattern of errors. Health is precious to every human being, because without it, even the noblest of ambitions is difficult to achieve. But nature, always working toward what is right, reserves health as a reward for those who do other things well. Health cannot be attained through direct effort alone. It must be a consequence of action, the result of a suitable cause. The secret to healing is to bring about health by removing the artificial obstacles that impede the natural flow of life. Part 1. The Historical Path Towards the Metaphysics of Medicine. Chapter 1. The Beginnings of Metaphysical Healing. The Healer. The First Priest, Physician, Psychologist. Candidates of the Chosen Nuot. Trances and Conscious Dreams. Illness as a Spiritual Mystery. The Prestige of Masks. Masks as an escape from the self. Medicine in songs and dances. Early medicines with fetishes and herbs. Origin of relics. Witch doctors do not practice evil. Modern witchcraft unexplainable. Doctors as the first administrators of the law. The uses and abuses of magic cursed dolls. The Healer. When a child falls, and the parents kiss the small injury so that it heals, this is a magical ritual that is one in spirit with the ancient miracles of the healer. Their power over the forces of evil was conceived in veneration of age, which was fundamental to primitive religions. It is reasonably clear that all religions originated veneration of age, and the belief that all forces invisible to the eye or beyond the comprehension of the average mind were supernatural. But this is not all that is known about the healer. Clear indications of his influence remain in our healing methods today. Therefore, he is entitled to our respect and our good intention to seek a better understanding of his methods, his place, and his position in the advancement of civilization. It is a mistake to assume that our remote and savage ancestors enjoyed the blessing of good health. The aborigine lived a dangerous and afflicted existence. Around him were enormous animals whose strength vastly exceeded his own, and there were small reptiles and insects whose cunning he could not match. The anthropological Adamic man who had become so great in his later years was the weakling of the prehistoric world, with little or nothing to be thankful for. He lived completely unaware of the natural causes of illness. He had made no reasonable connection between his lifestyle and his health, and so, for him, all diseases were of supernatural origin. He could see that good and evil struck together. The old and the young felt the same pain. The rich and the poor suffered side by side. They didn't know why. From this profound ignorance, fear was born. It was fear of everything, of everyone, fear. Of the large animals that roared in the jungles, fear of the small shiny things that buzzed in the swamps, fear of the thunder that rumbled across the sky and the lightning that filled the heavens with light, fear of floods and droughts, fear of earthquakes and tsunamis. Above all, fear of the darkness, that strange and fatal shadow that covered the earth every day. The night held 1,000 terrors to make the creatures tremble within their caves and huts during the long hours of darkness. Outside, strange sounds could be heard, and if one of the bravest ventured out to investigate their source, he never returned. In the morning, the others would find him dead, and usually partially devoured. The darkness was teeming with life that struck and destroyed, that slithered between feet, and had green eyes that gleamed in the dark. This was the life that barked and growled, moaned and hissed, life always waiting to inflict harm. Fear, the oldest and cruelest of human emotions, heartless and meaningless in itself, is the source of endless pain and misery. In a savage world ruled by fear, courage was just a moment of resistance followed by disaster. The more men fought against the unknown, the greater their fears became. Nature grew ever more terrible. The brave adventurer would crawl back to his lair like a whipped cream to reflect on the misfortunes of his condition. The first priest, doctor, psychologist. From this ancient and dark night of the mind that preceded the dawn of reason emerged the healer. We have no record of the origin or the processes that produced this fantastic hierophant of the earliest healing cults on earth. The first priest, the first physician, and the first psychologist. If to our more sophisticated minds the healer was a hideous monstrosity, to the savage world that produced him he was the beginning of hope. The first in a long line of adventurers who dared to alter the inevitable to meet human needs. Many researchers who have deeply examined ancient peoples and their knowledge have tried to explain the healer. Among them, psychologists seem to have been the most successful, since they have recognized their distant kinship with the healer and their methods. But psychology only opens a small part of the broad panorama of philosophy, and a closer examination of the healer can give us a broader perspective on its philosophy. Their point of view should allow us to discern more clearly the forces that shape it, the great movements that have guided its course. The physical origin of religion, in my opinion, is the veneration of age. Those who have lived long lives have experienced more. Tradition is the record of the long-lived. Not many reached old age in primitive times, and among savage peoples, there were too many dangers along the way. Thus, most races respected old age, and bestowed upon it dignities and honors like those given to gods and spirits. For, in the earliest stage of human society, those who reached the prime of life stood out in this simple reflection: The survivor was a superior man. The savage was never one to preserve what was useless. It wasn't love for his companion that led him to feed and protect the old warriors who could no longer sustain themselves. His considerations were entirely utilitarian. The elders knew the paths of the jungle and the hills. They had been to distant places, hunted in the forests, and crossed rivers on floating logs. They had heroes from past generations, and they were the keepers of the words of wisdom spoken by men long dead. In the beginning, man only relied on the strength of his arms, but this slowly changed. Another kind of strength had been found that the tribe could depend on when bravery had failed. This other strength is wisdom, and wisdom belonged to the elders who had lived a long time. The hereditary leader, young and in the prime of his power, honored for his strength, had behind him the elders, revered for their wisdom, and it was very beneficial for the young leader to consult them and benefit from their advice. Thus arose the dual form of government that existed in antiquity. It reached its full flowering in Egyptian culture, the rule of the priest and the king. Therefore, the fathers had to become priests through long and mysterious processes of veneration and tradition. Even today, it is the custom of Catholics call priest father. And the word pope, from the Greek papas, literally means father. It is well known in psychology that a young child bestows upon his parents, if he is not disillusioned too early, the same reverence that the child will later transfer to his concept of God. The Father is God, and God is the Father. How many parents realize that when their child scrapes their knee and runs to them for sympathy and help, they are expressing humanity's primary religious instinct? Later in life, when tragedies trouble the soul, the afflicted person brings their grief to God through the ritual of prayer, with the firm belief that they will find comfort and strength. Primitive man had no way of perpetuating his knowledge and records of his works, except through oral tradition. Over time, he learned to make drawings on the walls of ravines, but this was long before the establishment of the healer. Portraits of him, dressed in various animal skins, are among the earliest forms of art, candidates of the chosen neurotic. Men have always desired to be remembered, and for their deeds to live on after them. Thus, when elders felt they had little time left, they sought someone to instruct in their knowledge and history. This is how the neurotic became the savior of his tribe, and later of his race. In their search for suitable disciples, elders turned to the quietest and most thoughtful young people, for their minds were better suited to perpetuating tradition than the more greedy and warlike youths. Having found someone to their liking, the elder then devoted their final years to the task of transferring their knowledge, and with it, of course, a lengthy account of their personal exploits. When the old master joined the ghosts of their ancestors, the young disciple was, so to speak, ordained to carry on their wisdom, and probably in the elder's name rather than their own. Currently, a new condition has emerged. Veneration is no longer solely about respect for age. It is now directed toward any person of any age who possesses the knowledge of the elders. But, just as in modern times it is impossible to completely separate knowledge from the figure of the scholar, so too was it with the young, who then shared it out of respect for their wisdom. This was the next step in the development of the priesthood, in which those who knew received. They enjoyed special privileges. They sat with the warriors when important matters were discussed. These wise men were too valuable to be exposed in battle, and their occupations did not prepare them for military feats. They wore various distinctive signs and insignia. Their counsel was sought in all matters concerning the happiness and safety of the tribe. It was inevitable that illness would be considered by the wise men, for there was no other recourse for the sick. The wise men learned about illnesses based on what they had learned from the experiences of their ancestors in similar conditions. Any remedy that had helped in the past was repeated, and faith in the old ways certainly provided some relief. They retained the records in their memories as best they could, and since memory is linked to the imagination, these records grew and flourished in many curious ways. Metaphysical elements were certainly present in this ancient pattern. The psychic sensitivity of primitive people is an undeniable fact. The savage is very close to nature and to the animal life around him, and most animals possess a more developed sense of instinct than humans. Instinct may have been the beginning of mysticism, and it is not entirely impossible that some of the elders were natural spiritualists and possessed a form of mystical vision. Then, at some distant time, it was discovered that this sensitivity could be enhanced through fasting and vigils that exhaust physical strength. Those who have lived longer among wild tribes are the most convinced that not all the medicine man's powers are psychological or imaginary. Trances and dream awareness. Dreams likely played a significant role in the development of Aboriginal mysticism. The mysteries of dreams have never been fully explained, but it is well known that a person is more likely to dream about things that occupy a prominent place in their mind. Therefore, it is quite possible that tribal prophets were visited in dreams by the elders who had been their teachers. If these deceased did not actually appear, they seemed to come into consciousness, linking the past with the present through the mystery of dreams. Trances are nothing more than an artificial sleep induced by drugs, plants, suggestion, or autosuggestion, and their purpose is to provide easier access to the dream state and its phenomena. Here, then, are all the necessary elements to produce the medicine man. Time perfected this process. The elders became increasingly distant from untrained memory, transformed into the great spirits who had lived long ago, now dwelling in a strange phantom land, where the seer could seek them out in dreams and trances. And in this way the tribe's tradition became its religion, and the faith grew as cruel and primitive as its believers. It is impossible to understand the healer in terms of current norms of good and evil. He was part of his world, as we are part of ours, and such worlds have little in common. During sleep we draw closer to the elders, but our dreams are also greatly influenced by our conscious thought. We cannot know the healer, but at least we must respect him, with the deep understanding that without his strange powers, modern civilization could not be as it is. We cannot appreciate the healer's healing methods without understanding his religion. Theologically, religion is an attitude toward life, a set of beliefs and conclusions related to an individual's relationship with the spiritual world and its creatures. Morally or ethically, religion consists of rules of conduct, the things one can and cannot do. In primitive societies, actions that violated tribal law were punished in proportion to the severity of the offense. Thus, we can easily understand that early religious principles were mostly taboo, and only after thousands of years of refinement did ethics develop into the decorous standards we see today. Illness as a spiritual mystery. Initially, religion was nothing more than organized fear. Gradually, certain distinctive practices began to emerge, bearing witness to attitudes and convictions. Early theology was based on this principle: everything invisible to the untrained eye, or beyond the comprehension of the untrained mind, is supernatural. Illness, therefore, was a spiritual mystery, one approached only by those who possessed power over spirits and their malevolent forces. As far as we know, these were the tribe's beliefs regarding illness and disease. The disease itself is a spirit, without form or body, existing in the air and attaching itself to man with or without reason. This spirit, at will, can take any number of appearances, and can attack man in any of these forms, animate or inanimate. A person who possesses magical knowledge, or some powerful amulet, can send the spirit of disease against their enemies to destroy them. The disease can be caused by angry spirits, whether from deceased humans, animals, plants, or even minerals. Any indignity or neglect towards the dead of the tribe can cause their spirits to send illnesses or other misfortunes. Animals slaughtered for food can cause disease unless proper ceremonies are performed at the time of slaughter. Whether or not they possess special hidden powers, evil people can spread disease with their gaze, evil eye, or by touching an item belonging to the victim. The same healer can cause illness to anyone who doubts his powers or resists his authority. It should be noted that the gods have not been mentioned as the cause of physical misfortunes. This is because in those times the concept of higher deities did not exist, nor was illness considered a punishment for sin. The closest explanation was the fear of offending powerful spirits, but there was no ethical reason to be accused by the spirits, and ethics had little to do with appeasing their anger. Some authors refer to the practices of healers as black magic. This is incorrect, because there can be no perversion of power when there is no standard of what is right. Witchcraft became a negative and perverse force as civilization developed standards of integrity that can be violated. The term healer, therefore, is incorrectly interpreted as something evil, when such a term should only be applied to a savage or primitive magician. Masks have always played an important role in the healer's rituals. What was the origin of these strange masks? I believe they originally resembled elders. Most of these masks are grotesque and horrifying to us, but the strange designs were probably a matter of beauty and dignity, and full of subtle meaning for the primitive people who made them. The prestige of masks. In mask cults, it was believed that wearing a mask meant carrying the spirit it represented. So, if the healer wore the method, the old man became the personification of the old man, speaking with his voice and authority. The animal heads worn by Egyptian priests had the same meaning, and may have originated in totemism. The priest wears the mask of his spirit animal. The fear of masks may also have played a significant role in this ancient religious custom. The healer greatly increased his prestige by changing his appearance into something otherworldly. The natives knew, of course, that it was only a mask. Years ago in Darjeeling, in northern India, a number of dancing devils came to our hotel to put on a performance. Among them was a boy of about 8, who soon became a favorite with the tourists. In the afternoon, when the dance began, all the performers, including the boy, were masked to represent Tibetan demons. In the middle of the dance, the boy, who was wearing a papier-mâché bull's head, rushed into the crowd, which scattered, and everyone ran away shouting in alarm. Everyone knew the boy, and many had given him sweets that afternoon, but in the tumult, the educated white people ran faster than the locals. It was reasonable to assume that if the mask frightened mortals, it would have a similar effect on evil spirits. These, terrified by the impressive spectacle, would flee in haste and withdraw their malevolent forces from the village. This belief lies at the root of some Tibetan ceremonies, and is recorded in many accounts of healers and their methods. The savage saw no reason to suppose that spirits were more intelligent than he was. What frightened him should also frighten the ghosts. Masks as an escape from oneself. There is also a deeper psychological meaning to the masks. Their designs arise from the parts unconscious, the subconscious of the human intellect. Possibly the designs were brought forth from dreams, and are evidence of strange impulses locked away in the most remote corners of the mind. The religious art of savage peoples has a dramatic integrity that should give the psychologist much to ponder. The mask was an escape from oneself. The wearer became another person, and in many ways lived another life, with all the implications of the new identity. In some Native American tribes, people who have suffered a long series of misfortunes change their names to escape misery. A new name signifies a new personality. The Native American becomes a different person, and the spirits who disliked the old name would have no reason to torment the person with the new one. Any actor who uses makeup will understand this psychology. Dressed up with cat whiskers, he'll look like King Lear. He has to feel like King Lear, and if he doesn't, then he's a bad actor. Then, With a crepe wig and a bit of grease paint, you can make a man feel like Lord Beaconsfield. Why can't a superhuman mask make the wearer feel a little more powerful? In fact, they make that spirit seem closer and more real. Analytical research should be done in this direction. It's a more provocative subject. Various types of rattles have always been part of the medicine man's paraphernalia. His rattle is another means of frightening spirits, or of attracting their attention. It also awakens the sick person, making them aware of the medicine man's presence, thus focusing their mind on the treatment they were receiving, an important process in so-called suggestive therapy, or healing by suggestion. Many of these rattles were adorned with symbols resembling lightning flashes. This was an indication that the sounds they made were intended to represent thunder. The savage was always impressed by loud sounds, and his ears, sensitive to noise, were much more developed than ours. Drums, flutes, and other primitive instruments also served the healer in his rituals. Different tribes developed their own special practices, but in the beginning, they were all the same. The antiquity of the healer is recorded in the universal distribution of his methods. There are no primitive peoples in the world today among whom he has not emerged, and there is no civilized race whose spiritual culture of healers does not bear witness to his early presence. It is more than likely that music and dance began with the healer, which he used as a means to drive away evil spirits or evoke benevolent spirits. Medicine, songs, and dances. Music had its beginnings in the imitation of natural sounds, such as animal cries and birdsong. After the healer had donned the mask of a creature, it was part of the procedure to imitate the sounds that creature made. The endless repetition of animal-like tones and notes gave rise to simple rhythms. In some parts of his ceremonies, the healer needed greater emphasis, and in the middle of his chant, he would shake a rattle or strike his drum. Thus, musical accompaniment was born. As time passed, the various medicinal songs became more or less standardized, and thus musical composition came into being. Its form and rhythm were established by tradition. Musical keys were arranged according to the natural differences in human voices and the various tones of primitive instruments. Later, the Greeks organized chords according to the comfort of their own voices. Harmonics were unknown until the time of Pythagoras. From the earliest available records, it appears that the dance originated in the healer's efforts to imitate the movements of the creatures whose faces he used as masks. When he wore an elephant mask, some inner force compelled him to assume the form of an elephant, and his gait was slow and dignified. But if his mask was that of a bird, he would hop and try to give the impression of flying. After the savage's initial efforts, the rhythms of his rattle and drum gradually changed. He retained the basic movements of the creatures he represented, but brought them within the confines of his other rituals. Gradually the turns became symbolic rather than literal. The dance forms, like the songs that usually accompanied them, then became traditional. Dance has always been part of religion, first as a magical rite, and later as an aesthetic event and ritual. Theatre also began with the healer, as a sacred drama that continued until the collapse of classical civilization. This idea was later taken up in the medieval sacramental mysteries of the Catholic Church, which can still be seen in isolated regions. The penitentes of New Mexico include sacred performances of the drama of Christ's life among their unusual rites to this day. When the healer lived in the personalities of his masks, he became an actor, and as he acquired increasing skill in pantomime and performance, there was a corresponding increase in the psychological results of his treatments. Much of his early performance was in a state of ecstasy or light trance. Therefore, we know that his theatre emerged of their own subconscious nature. In Egyptian and Greek mystery rituals, the performers were always masked, and the gods they portrayed were generally accepted as the deities themselves. When ancient writers claim to have spoken with certain gods, It usually meant they had spoken with priests wearing the gods' masks. This was not a deception on the part of the priests, as many modern thinkers have assumed. They knew that masks covered a human face, but it was an ancient belief that the gods resided in those who resembled them. In this we find the true explanation for idols and sacred images, early medicines with fetishes and herbs. The fetish was the beginning of formal medicine. It was the first compound used in the treatment of illnesses. A fetish can be defined as any material object in which a spirit or spiritual power is present. The fetish was some natural substance that, due to its particular appearance or properties, was unusual in appearance, made of bone, stone, or wood, carved with the image of some creature, some ceremonial object, or a sacred relic. More often, a fetish was composed of various magical or non-magical elements, such as stones, feathers, hair, bones, branches, and beads, and possessed a special virtue due to certain rites performed while assembling the parts, or because the particular pattern was sacred by tradition. Typically, the fetish was carried by the person or placed in the home as protection against evil forces. Fetishes made from small objects and herbs were sometimes swallowed. They were even inserted under the skin to increase their effectiveness. This is probably the oldest form of medicine. Herbs were originally used only as fetishes, but as time went on they were chewed or boiled and drunk, not for their chemical action, but so that their spirit might be captured and retained. Through trial and error, it was gradually discovered that some plants were more effective than others, and some illnesses responded to one herb and others to another. In this way, pharmacology was formed. Magic was the motive, medicine the result. The evolution of fetishes is an interesting phase in the history of magical practices. As nations refined their beliefs, the fetish evolved into the amulet. Among the Egyptians there was a wide variety of amulets, small figures of gods, goddesses, and sacred symbols, carved from stone or molded from baked clay and glass. These figures were perforated, so they could be hung around the neck on a cord. So great is the number of these small amulets found in the ruins of Egyptian cities that they must have been widely used. An amulet was a protective charm against various evils. The theory behind its use was that any spirit or sorcerer attacking the wearer would face the image and power of a protective deity. The crucifix used by many Christians is either a symbol or an amulet, depending on the wearer's motivation. If they believe the symbol protects them in some way, the cross becomes an amulet. The amulet evolved into the talisman. The latter is a magical charm decorated with Kabbalistic formulas or mystical designs calculated to protect the owner against physical or metaphysical dangers. They are usually made of metal, preferably silver. One type of talisman, shaped like body parts and organs, was used to ensure or restore the health of the parts they represented. Sometimes talismans are hung in temples or churches as offerings or as petitions for help. In Eastern countries, a third type of talisman was found, small cases containing prayers or phrases from sacred texts, used by saints or on pilgrimages to important shrines. Among Islamic peoples, there are also many beautifully painted talismanic jewels. A small talisman in the shape of an open hand is a favorite among Arab nations. It represents the hand of Fatima, daughter of Muhammad. It's worth noting that considerable quantities of talismans are manufactured for trade with indigenous tribes. These fetishes include most of the desired types, are popular in various regions, and are all made according to the finest native specifications. These talismans are made in England for use throughout the colonial empire, and travelers should keep this in mind when searching for indigenous religious trinkets. It's highly likely that the ancient West African UU amulet originated in London. The origin of the relics. There is only a small step from talisman to sacred relic. This important object of modern religious practice also had its origins in the world of the medicine man. When a savage captured a powerful animal or killed a renowned warrior in battle, he would keep a part of the vanquished's body, thus acquiring the strength of his spirit. The medicine man's magical instruments were often crafted from human or animal bones. Bowls and drums made from human skulls can be found on Tibetan altars, and bone decorations adorn the facades of medicine men's huts. Buddhism has many relics, and the Buddha's tooth in Calcutta is the subject of annual celebrations. A procession was once held through the streets to the Temple of the Holy Tooth for my benefit. Most Buddhist shrines have been built over the remains of great arhats, and priests and lay people carry small reliquaries containing bone fragments or ashes of some saint. As in the Christian faith, these relics are believed to have the power to cure illnesses and confer holiness. When European monarchs grew tired of using the royal touch to treat scrofula, these princes devised the scheme of gifting blessed coins to effect cures. These gold coins are a combination of talisman and relic. Their magical powers were talismanic, but they were also relics associated with the king, who could heal by divine right. These coins are still occasionally used in Scotland, where they are recognized as excellent remedies for some ailments, especially skin conditions. The healer's practices are not evil. The practices of the medicine man are now called witchcraft, but this is misleading in the current meaning of the word. Witchcraft is the survivor of the ancient black magic of Lemuria. Such dark people are found everywhere in the world. The shadow of the medicine man looms over them, and his wild spirit is in their blood. Witchcraft, as practiced by primitive peoples, is not a perversion of mystical doctrines as most people believe. Witchcraft is very ancient. It existed before humans recognized and differentiated between good and evil. As some peoples developed faster than others and refined their beliefs, it became customary to consider primitive beliefs as evil. In theological terms, it is not a very enlightened attitude to assume that the priest of any cult other than one's own is a servant of the devil. Believing that illness was a spirit wandering the nights in search of someone to afflict, the medicine man faced a delicate problem when trying to force such a spirit out of his patient. If the spirit was left without a dwelling place, it could become greatly offended, attacking the entire village, destroying the inhabitants and their flocks. So the spirit had to be kept content, even when deprived of its victim. There was only one way: it had to be induced to find a new abode, one as desirable as possible. One ancient method was to choose a scapegoat and sacrifice it for the good of the whole tribe. All sacrifices were originally performed to appease the wrath of spirits and ghosts. Another way was to put the spirit into some kind of fetish and leave the enchanted object where someone else might find it, thus making it the spirit's victim in its desire to find lodging. This certainly might not seem ethical, but the instinct for self-preservation was the law of the land. So whoever found the fetish had to find their own way of getting rid of the unwanted guest. The healer's supposed power to assume the forms of various animals and birds likely originated from the use of masks and disguises. This belief spread to every corner of the earth, with werewolves, were-tigers, were-bats, and were-owls being universally accepted. The form the healer took was determined by the local attitudes toward the animals and wildlife of the area, but the principle remained the same. Lycanthropy is the folklore associated with the name of Lycon, the mythical king of Arcadia, who was transformed into a wolf by Zeus, who was offended because the king offered him human flesh. In many myths, people are transformed into animals as punishment for their misdeeds, but in most cases, this simply means that their animal nature takes over, and they become vicious. they become human beasts. The myths of lycanthropy do not imply that the physical body of the magician or sorcerer transforms into a wolf, but rather that the soul or double of the sorcerer assumes the appearance of a wolf. I recently heard a story about an owl man at one of the American government schools in India a few years ago. The story is corroborated by a participant in the incident. Several boys were sleeping on an enclosed porch when they were awakened by an owl that had somehow gotten through the gate. The boys immediately decided it was an owl man and attacked it with sticks and shoes, ultimately killing it, and took the bird to a nearby forest and traveled about 3 miles to the home of a suspected witch. As they approached, they heard the old woman wailing and screaming as if in great pain. They threw the dead owl down the front steps and returned to the school. The next day, they learned that the old woman had died. Everyone agreed that they had killed a witch. When witches planned to go to the Sabbat, they would transform into werewolves or vampires, or travel to distant places, enter trances or comatose states, and emerge in spirit bodies or doubles. If they were wounded in this magical body, the physical body suffered the same misfortune. Here is an indication that at least one aspect of witchcraft doctrine pertains to the phenomena of the subconscious mind. If research into thought transmission fulfills current expectations, it is possible that the victim may sense the witch's mental intentions, and that the victim may see, in their dreams, the form the witch had assumed. Inexplicable modern witchcraft. The mental effect of believing oneself to be bewitched demoralizes people who are not normally superstitious. Many white men have been expelled from primitive countries by the work of medicine men. The human mind is very susceptible to phobias and fixations, even when beliefs contradict every conviction of conscious intelligence. Many times, men and women have emphatically told me that they did not believe in witchcraft, adding that it is best not to get involved in that or in mysterious matters. A farmer returning from Java, New Guinea, told me that arousing the animosity of the natives was a grave misfortune. He said that when these people are angered, strange things happen that cannot be explained by any of the knowledge we possess today. He told me that the family of a plantation owner was tormented until they left the island. A stream of mud and filth poured into the various rooms of the house. It seemed to come from the ceiling, and the showers were plagued with pests for months. Much of the law surrounding witchcraft is susceptible to reasonable explanation and does not originate from the practices of the healer. The famous Brocken Mountain, the Witches' Mountain in Germany's Black Forest, was a product of ecclesiastical imagination and fanaticism. The Brocken, considered the site of the infernal Sabbat, was actually a place where ancient pagans maintained their pre-Christian rites long after the rise of the Church. Since all the ancient mysteries were institutions of Satan, according to the Church Fathers, it didn't take long for their pronouncements to infect the public mind. The result was a belief in witchcraft unparalleled in history. Thus we see that from the hut of the medicine man among the savages sprang sciences and superstitions, arts and artifices, spirits and fairies, ghosts and goblins, creeds and fetishes. Like the fabulous banyan tree of India, whose branches fall to the earth and take root and become trees in turn, the primitive magic of the medicine man spread throughout the world. Most of the respected beliefs of modern times are nothing more than a refinement of his ancient doctrines. It would seem that we also owe to this jungle sorcerer the discovery and first use of intoxicating drinks, when he discovered that certain herbs affected his mind and made it easier to achieve the trances he needed in his ministry. The Egyptians believed that the blood of ancient warriors that fell to the earth was absorbed by the roots of the grape. For them, intoxication was the possession of spirits that fought in the veins of the drinker, just as they had fought in life. Even in classical times, wine was considered the blood of Dionysus, and the frenzy it caused was sacred to the rites of that god. The use of wine in modern sacraments is a direct descendant of a rite from the Dionysian mysteries of Greece. Doctors as the first administrators of the law. At the beginning of his reign, the healer primarily used his knowledge to preserve his tribe, but as time passed, it also became his duty to punish those who violated taboos. He was, therefore, the first administrator of the law. The tribal organization demanded complete obedience to traditions, the customs of the elders. Disobedience meant expulsion from the tribe. If the violation was minor, the punishment might be mild, but if the offense was serious, death was the penalty. Somewhere within this mystery, conscience was born. The inner voice warning to obey, merged with the fear of the consequences of deviating from inherited laws. The supernatural powers attributed to the healer played a significant role in the development of conscience, because it was believed that he could reveal men's thoughts and the feelings in their hearts. Emperor Jones, in Eugene O'Neill's play, criminals punish themselves out of their own guilt. In earlier times, the healer took the credit. We know conscience as a kind of fear that can defeat a man even if he is immune to other forms of punishment. Conscience was the firstborn of taboos. At some point, the healer realized the possibilities his position offered. Because there was no proof of his honesty, no incentive or example to guide the course of the magical arts, he was tempted to use his mystical powers for his own benefit. It was natural for the sorcerer to exploit the fear and respect he had garnered, and thus he gained control not only of his people's spirits but also of their bodies. Whatever wealth the tribe members possessed ultimately came to him as payment for his many services. The healer rarely aspired to be the chief, he was content to rule the rulers. That afforded him greater protection. And in the natural course of things, he was inevitably inspired to make friends and influence people. And since he could, he did, cursing his enemies, bewitching them, transferring diseases to them. These were all ways of intimidating the poor savages, who were afraid to refuse any of the magician's wishes. This development tarnished the good reputation of the healer and greatly increased the prestige of unscrupulous physicians. It then became necessary to combat one spell with another, and for most of his life, man was either bewitched or under treatment. Healers waged many secret battles among themselves, preparing infernal potions and diabolical spells. This was the beginning of those strange and malevolent practices that would send shivers down the spines of Europeans for over 1,500 years, until the witch cult was revived in the early centuries of the Christian era. In Africa, missionaries and healers are still vying for control of the soul of the Black Continent. A recently converted native arrived at a missionary center seeking help. The old gods were angered because this man had joined the new faith. A demon appeared in his home and tormented the black man and his family. The evil spirit had hair like whips and would strike the converts with its head until their bodies became masses of bleeding welts. What did the missionaries do? Well, what could they do? They were representatives of a faith that had long taught about miracles and the casting out of demons. But these well-intentioned men lacked the power to perform even a small miracle to benefit this afflicted family. The use and abuse of magic. There is a certain degree of ethics among primitive peoples in all forms of witchcraft that exist in our world today. The perversions of magical powers are viewed with general disapproval, even by remote African tribes. And even today, hatred of healers suspected of malevolent practices is quite common, even among their own followers, because growth processes operate throughout nature and in human nature. Voodoo, or Vodou, consists of magic and witchcraft rituals that are prevalent in Haiti due to their African origins. But there is a clear line between the use and abuse of magic. Hongan, he is the priest who performs the miracles of the voodoo cult. The bush, he is the magician or sorcerer. In his recent work, the Haitian people James G. Leyburn writes, "A respectable Hungan will not allow himself to dabble in black magic, destined to bring misfortune to another person, but said work is the action in the trade of the Bokor, who knows the dangers of his profession, and yet is willing to take the risk for the sake of high profitability." Cursed dolls. One of the most common forms of black magic, based on ancient beliefs, involves cursed dolls. These are small images of a person, carved from wood or simply made of cloth stuffed with straw or sawdust, with the victim's face drawn on the knob representing the head. I've had the opportunity to examine some of these dolls, and in some cases, a photograph of the person against whom the doll was to be used had been glued to them. This practice is based on the belief in masks and idols, that the victim is connected to the doll through sympathetic magic by resemblance. However, to further ensure the effectiveness of the cursed dolls, it's customary to include something that belonged to the person being bewitched. A lock of hair or nail clippings are the first choice, but a piece of clothing or a shoe can also be used. The victim is thus more closely linked to the doll by the psychic energy lingering on their personal belongings. Once the doll is finished, rituals are performed over it, invoking the magical powers of nature to aid in the evil work. Then the doll is tortured in various ways. Needles are inserted into it, cuts are made on its arms and legs, red-hot irons are applied, and finally, a knife or needle is pierced through its heart. When Catherine de' Medici brought the Rogeri, Cosimo Rogeri, from Italy to be her sorcerers, she learned from them the secrets of the cursed dolls. This Queen of France went so far as to smash these small figures on a miniature shelf, in order to increase the suffering of the enemies they represented. It was a common belief that she disposed of many people in this way. There was a particularly troubled moment in France when one of these dolls, made to represent the Queen herself, was discovered. From Catherine's court there is a long way to a small town in the southwestern United States, but here you can still find cursed dolls, which fulfill the same strange functions, as in the case of an indigenous woman, who, jealous of the skillful fingers of another carpet weaver, made a doll and broke its hands, thus destroying her rival's skill. The fear among primitive peoples of being photographed or even painted stems from the belief that any damage done to their images could affect them. They don't even like to give their names, nor will they give any personal belongings to strangers unless they are certain of the person's integrity. Modern man believes he has outgrown the magic of the primeval world. When he hears of hexes in Pennsylvania, voodoo in Louisiana, or an outbreak of witchcraft in New Mexico, he smiles indulgently, wondering how such things can happen in enlightened times. He sincerely believes that the new, healthier way of life has left chanting and drumming behind forever, but he cannot help but hear them. The very foundation of modern jazz is African rhythm. The answer is that humanity is awakening to ancient, very ancient memories. The modern world is young, the jungle is old, the ways of the jungle were our ways, and they are not easily forgotten. Within each of us remains something of the ancient magic. Somewhere inside us, the old ways are calling, telling us to return to the dance and the drum. If science fails us, we seek the healer again with the strange and profound confidence that magic cannot fail. Though we deny miracles, we live each day in full expectation of the miraculous. Sober reason is our outward glory, but our inner conviction echoes the healer's chants. We deny it with our tongues, but in our hearts we still believe in his magic. He is part of our racial heritage, part of the blood and marrow of our species. Many of the imposing edifices of modern knowledge are nothing more than the long shadow of a jungle lair, where the healers of ancient burned bones of the great cave bear, so that the ghosts will come and float in the smoke. The chief medicine of the American Indians. The medicine man is not necessarily a healer, although healing may be one of his tasks. The Indians have long used the word medicine to any mysterious force beyond their understanding. Primarily, The medicine man was a holy man who could speak with spirits, whom he knew the paths of the gods. The most advanced medicine man, a specialist in healing, possesses not only magical powers but also some knowledge of medicine and surgery. These seer priests are also masters of hypnosis and mental suggestion. Modern scientists have recognized their excellence, and all indications are that their knowledge of the suggestive arts is far ahead of that of white men. Sitting Bull, one of the most celebrated medicine priests, whose visions allowed him to surprise and annihilate General Custer's troops at the Battle of Little Bighorn,